When I was a sophomore in high school, I was dating this guy. Let's call him Jack. He was this brooding guy in the Spanish class, and I was super into the whole mysterious, not talking to anyone, not caring vibe. Once we started dating, things were pretty cool. He was nice and funny, but he would make little comments all the time that just weren't okay. For example, I didn't like cursing back then. So when he would say fuck, I would ask him to stop, and he would just say, why the fuck should I fucking stop saying fuck? Over the next few months, things got worse and worse. He didn't want me talking to boys, which I accepted as him just being a jealous boyfriend. But then, he didn't want me talking to girls either, because he thought I would badmouth him. When I talked to girls in front of him, he accused me of talking in code about him, even though I was only saying things like, oh, that test in math was hard, right? Then came the emotional manipulation. When we could get into arguments, he would storm out of my house and cause scenes in front of my neighbors, forcing me to just agree to whatever he wanted so that he would stop making me look bad in front of others. He would say things like, oh, if you love me, you would do this. One time, I tried to break up with him, and he ran to my house 10 miles away to make sure that I felt guilty enough to stay with him. Not long after all of this came the physical stuff. He would throw things, hit me, he even punched a hole in my wall. That was fun trying to come up with an explanation for my parents. 10 months after we started dating, I finally ended it after he sexually assaulted me. I told my parents everything, and they made sure that I was able to break up with him without him guilting me into backing out. What I didn't realize was that, during the sexual assault, he'd taken pictures. The next day at school, he threatened to show them to everyone. His friends, my parents, teachers, college admissions, everyone. I told one of my rather intimidating friends about it, and she made sure to put a stop to that. She ended up hunting him down, beating the shit out of him, and forcing him to delete the pics. She was the best, and I made sure to buy her a burger for that. He'd also lent me his graphing calculator for algebra. You know, the ones that cost like $200. He told me that he didn't want it back, but that he wanted the money to buy a new one. He also wanted $500 for all of the pizza, dinners, etc. that he bought me over our relationship. I said fuck that, bagged up all of the stuff he'd lent me, and put it in his locker. When I got home that night, the bag was sitting on my front porch. I ended up driving to his house and giving the stuff to his parents, making sure to explain that while he bought me food, I also bought him food, so I didn't owe him shit. All of that is a long-winded way to say that this guy sucked. Fast forward about a year, I was in therapy, taking medicine, and doing much better after that entire ordeal. I hadn't spoken to him at all, and things were great. Then, I get a call from him. Now, Jack's dream was to join the Marines. He'd been training with the Marine recruiter for nearly 2 years, getting in shape, making sure he was up to standard to join. As much as I hated him, I have to admit that he worked his ass off for that. When Jack called me, he asked me to be a character reference for him. Why he asked me, I have no fucking idea. After all the shit he did, you'd think he would have wanted me as far away from the recruiting people as possible. Nonetheless, he asked. So, I did what any good friend would do, and I told him, sure, I'd be happy to be your reference. He said great, and told me the stuff to say once the recruiting officer called. Stuff like, Jack's an upstanding person, very loyal, very strong, very hardworking, a great guy to have in the Marines. I said no problem, and hung up. 2 weeks later, I get the call. Sergeant whatever asked me a couple of questions, like how did I know Jack, did I think he would be a good fit for the Marines, what kind of person was he, etc. You better believe that I told that guy everything. I told him about the emotional manipulation, the physical abuse, the sexual abuse, all of it, in painstaking detail. The sergeant was pretty quiet through all of this, just listening, jotting everything down I imagine. At the end of the call, he said, "Thank you for telling me all of this. I'll be honest, that's not what I was expecting to hear. but I appreciate your honesty. That's not the kind of person we want in the Marines." I agreed with him on that point, and we hung up. Never talked to Jack again after that. Last I heard, he's working at McD's, still in our podunk hometown. I guess my character reference didn't help him get into the Marines. Whoops. Edit. Thanks for the gold and silver. And also, thank you for the supportive comments. I was debating whether or not to even post this, and I'm glad I did. To answer some questions. No, my friend and I are not still in contact. We stayed friends for a couple of years, but once we both went off to college we kind of just lost touch. Yes, I swear now. I'm not shitting on McD's or the people who worked there at all. I'm just saying that he went from having his dream job to having a minimum wage job in his hometown. I didn't press charges or try to give the pics to the police because I just didn't think of it at the time. I was in panic mode and just wanted it to go away. But if it happened now, I still probably wouldn't go to the police. Most sexual assault cases never end in the abuser getting in trouble and the victim has their name dragged through the mud, and it's just not worth it for me tbh. A note on Jack. While I'm not excusing what he did, he had his own issues that I'm not going to get into here. I looked him up last night and he's got a girlfriend now. They seem happy and it looks like he got the help he needed. I still don't like him, but I'm glad things seem to have worked out for him. Last year I lived with my then girlfriend. This turned out to be a huge mistake. Soon after moving in it became clear that she expected me to cover her rent from time to time. As she was between jobs I let this slide expecting to be paid back in due course. It was a similar story with household bills. Whilst she paid her share to begin with, she eventually refused to contribute. I asked her if she could just open an overdraft with her bank till she got more work, which would have been free of charge, but she refused. Within the first few months of living together she got quite behind on rent and bills. When she finally got a job, she began to catch up on arrears, but was always reluctant to pay. I thought she might be reluctant because it left her with little money, which would be fair enough. But things continued this way, even after she got a better job. When she refused to pay rent one month I explained that this wasn't fair and insisted that she pay up. After considerable outbursts she paid, but not without making it clear that this wasn't what she wanted to do. During this argument I was in a different town working, and a few days later she let me know that she'd moved out and broken up with me. I was upset with the breakup, and further upset that she insisted she didn't still owe rent or bills, which left me in a dire financial position. To cut a long story short, she realized her mistake and came back a few weeks later, but with a renewed conviction that she didn't owe me anything because her returning was payment enough. The next few months consisted of her threatening to leave at multiple points for not supporting her enough, despite me buying most of our food, letting her pay late, and bringing her lunch every day. She even repeatedly threatened to kill me one night after coming home drunk. I thought this was especially rude considering I'd stayed up late to make sure she got home safe. Other notable events were her and her mother having a deep discussion on how to leave me high and dry on rent. Her mother was a classy lady, and her getting verbally abusive, that I wouldn't drop her name from the tenancy agreement, must have thought I was stupid. Needless to say the relationship wasn't meant to be, and didn't last into the new year. Ex-girlfriend ended it. She eventually moved home, but agreed to meet her obligations, and pay her remaining half of the rent. Sometime after this had boiled over I met a fantastic girl and we eventually got together. Happy days I thought. Not quite. Ex-girlfriend discovered I had met someone else and absolutely lost her shit, calling me all names under the sun, calling me out for betrayal, etc. She didn't consider that breaking up with someone might make them not want you anymore. Incensed, ex-girlfriend stopped paying. At the time I hadn't been keeping track and thought she owed me around £300. After she calmed down she agreed to pay. A few days passed with no payment when I got a message from her mother claiming everything was paid and to stop asking her daughter for money already paid to you. She went on to say that any further requests for money could be treated as harassment. At this point I was irritated by the entitlement and rudeness of the pair and went back through my bank statements to check exactly how behind on payments she was. It turned out the shortfall was more than double what I initially thought. So I prepared a formal letter of demand for payment and posted it to ex-girlfriend's address. Several days later I got a call from the police saying that a harassment report had been made against me. I explained the situation and the police confirmed that no harassment was made. I was surprised that ex-girlfriend would waste police time to try to get out of paying the debt and decided to take pro-revenge to obtain justice. I discovered that for the entire period of our tenancy, ex-girlfriend hadn't been paying council tax. Essentially she hadn't told the council she lived there. I took it upon myself to inform the council that there was a second person living at the property avoiding tax. They were appreciative of this information and further appreciated me furnishing them with an up-to-date home address for tax dodger ex-girlfriend. In parallel, I took ex-girlfriend to court over the unpaid rent and bills using the tenancy agreement we signed and got the majority of it back. I left my ex-husband with our then 5-year-old son when we were going to be evicted as a result of his gambling and addiction issues. My son and I ended up living in a friend's dining room and stayed there for about 6 months until we moved into a room of our own. About 3 months after we'd left, I took my son back to visit with ex. When I picked my son up, I saw a state lottery bag in ex's car. Ex had won a pretty big lottery award a few years before, which just fueled the gambling addiction, and he ran through it in a couple months. So I recognized this as a swag bag you get when you're a big winner. When my son and I got back to my friend's place, I did some digging and found ex had won about $250,000 2 months to the day after my son and I had been forced to move. We were still married and no one had filed for divorce yet. About a week before, I also found out he had a new girlfriend who he was conveniently seeing while we were still living together. That will be relevant later. I confronted him and told him I didn't even want half, just enough to get my son and I settled and start over, but he was furious I'd found out and threatened to take my son as I couldn't afford to take care of him, and now he could. I was understandably upset and was freaking out to a friend right after the confrontation. Now, my ex had 2 kids with a prior ex to whom he owed thousands in back child support. My friend just asked, "What's her number?" I was still sobbing and shaking and gave it to her. My friend called and said, "Hello prior ex. This is a Harley Hills friend. Just thought you'd want to know exist, just won $250K in the lottery. Have a nice night." Prior ex immediately called me to see what that was about. I told her what had happened and we came up with a plan. I was meeting one last time with ex, who'd agreed to pay off the title loan on my car that I'd taken out to pay our rent while we were still together. I was to meet him at his bank. He'd give me the cash and I would take the cash to pay off the loan. As soon as he handed me the money, I texted prior ex the name of the bank. She filed a garnishment and very soon after his accounts were frozen. He texted me furious. I told prior ex and I just said, "You threatened to take my son because I didn't have the money to care for him, but you did. Now, you don't." Prior ex ended getting what was left. This was a month later and only about $90,000 was left, and the court made new girlfriend pay prior ex the money ex had given her for rent and for various gifts, which prior ex then sent to me. Not much but a huge help when you're starting over. It's been almost 5 years now. New girlfriend is still just girlfriend, even though they got engaged before I even knew she existed, and, again, before anyone filed for divorce, and she utterly despises me and prior ex. We are both cool with it. This is a long one. It requires some setup. The main players are my mother, M, my ex, X, X's mother, XM, my fiance, just a fling at the time, F, and me. So a bit of backstory and groundwork. At the time, I was a university student in my 2nd year of biotechnology. I'm autistic and have another heap of social issues. Suffice to say I can't do emotions easily. Then you have M. She lives with her boyfriend, now my stepdad, who was very high up and high risk at the BBC, British Broadcasting Company. It's the national TV corp in the UK, and runs a PMC, private military contractor. M works as head admin for the company and most of the guys working are her favors. When she talks about it, you'd think it's some James Bond level shit. Then there is the ex, a real bunny boiler. She's lovely and sweet 90% of the time, somewhat childish and feels like she's supposed to be 16 not 19. However, the other 10% of the time she's pure crazy and evil. Not that anyone who hadn't dated her knew it. When we were dating, she'd cause me to have breakdowns about once every 2 weeks and would gaslight me often enough. My friend group at the time just assumed I was going through a rough patch due to exams and uni stress. Then you have XM, a self-obsessed woman who is of the opinion that her little girl could never harm a fly, a very controlling woman who would puppet X to say what she wanted. Point at the time, me, X and a few friends lived together in university accommodation. Basically everyone has their own room and bathroom, but shared communal area, and all amenities and repairs are prepaid and covered for by the uni. It's expensive, £100 a week, but fantastic if you are a student, as you don't have to worry about fixing things or paying bills. Now we have that out the way, our story starts simple. Point: for a few weeks we've been rocky. She's been telling me off more and more, and I've been having more and more breakdowns. I was gifted a set of very lovely and expensive porcelain roasting trays by my gran. This was her last gift to me before she passed away. The rule in the kitchen was no one touches them but me. Point: X is cleaning the kitchen with flat mitts and decides to put away these roasting trays and accidentally drops one. Friends say she did it deliberately. I wave it away and ask her to get me a new one. I assume it's an accident and put my anger to the side. About 2 weeks pass and we break up. Easter rolls round. Most of the flat goes home. I don't. I have work, she doesn't, because whatever reason. And one other, we'll call her Libby. Libby can drive and has a car. Over Easter a friend from a club both me and X attend starts flirting with me. This is F. And then since I'm autistic, I don't get what's going on till Libby tells me to take the poor girl on a date. So I do. I ask Libby to drive us, and X tries to get in the car, saying she's coming with us. WTF, UUH, no. We tell her to jog on. She keeps this up, trying to act as if we are still together, creeping on me, trying to get in my room at night, somehow always being in the kitchen when I'm in there, trying to wear sexy clothing. ECT. You're supposed to tell accommodation if people are doing things like this. I told accommodation, and they told me to man up and just deal with it. Oh, and she stopped washing, like anything. No clean clothes or anything. 2 weeks of this pass. We are starting to enter exam time. My porcelain roasting dishes still haven't been replaced. I don't care about anything else but my exams and those roasting dishes. They were very dear to me. So I politely ask her to replace them. She's in her room watching anime. Tells me in no uncertain terms to fuck off, and she'll get round to it. She doesn't have time with all her revising. 3 days later, we have a power out, and I'm sat on the washing machine. It's in another building, on my phone using my data, and decide to find a replacement. I find one on Amazon for about £40, $50. It takes me less than 10 minutes, and I send it to her on Facebook. She ignores it, so I send her another message pointing out she could even make use of my Amazon Prime to have it to me in 2 days. Then that's it. Never have to deal with each other again. She storms down the corridor and bangs on my door, screaming, swearing and being a general crazy person. I finally lose my temper and yell at her to shut up and decide to lay down the truth and tell her that she needs to get her shit in order, replace the stuff she broke and take a damn shower. She turns away from me and starts walking down the corridor, still screaming and being a crazy person. I grab her shoulder trying to get her to stop so we can finally fix this shit show. She turns round and tries to punch me. I instantly try and defend myself and knock her over. F, who was chilling in my room, sees all of this. X screams and starts saying I assaulted her and runs into her room. I go have a shower and try to relax. Now this bit is information from friends and discovered after the fact. X hung herself via a choker on her coat hooks to make it look like I strangled her, then called her parents to say I strangled her from nowhere. You're supposed to take events to accommodation before it's forwarded to the police. X refused to talk to the police about it. F however insisted we go provide a pre-form statement. It's something you can do to say this happened. This is my half of it. I'm worried the other person will come in to lie. I want this on record. That woman is a godsend. XM turns up and lives in X's room for several days. You are not supposed to have visitors turn up for more than one night and only with booking. And starts making life difficult for the entire flat, trying to conduct an investigation and asking all sorts of questions. Eventually everyone starts to avoid her. XM reports it to accommodation and provides a load of evidence that is falsified. I get called in and told what's going on and that I need to provide a statement ECT. I ask to see the evidence and the uni refuses. I'm 19 at this point and have no idea what to do. So I call them, she tells me to, and to this day I remember the words, because she was apocalyptic. Sit tight, do nothing, sign nothing. I will be down tomorrow. Now M is a lovely woman, but she has this ungodly ability to terrify anyone. I'm not sure if it's a mother thing or just unique, but my entire flat met her once before this incident, and I was told by all of them, if she ever is coming down again, give us warning so we can run. The warning they got was my best friend, let's call him Skip, and guy who lived next door to me, having her knock on his window at 10 AM to be let in. We live in a gated area with security guards. We still aren't sure how she got in. It's a 4.5 hour drive to my uni from my mother's house, and she was dressed like she was about to represent someone in court. So he shit his pants and let her in. I woke up, showered and met her in the kitchen, where she had been made a cup of tea by Skip. He looked like he'd just been informed there was a live grenade in his rectal cavity. She asked him to go get everyone else in the flat, except X and XM. Now I say asked, because it was phrased as could he please, but we both knew, if he said no, then he probably wished he'd have been able to drown himself in the teacup. I was then asked where XM and X were. I told her that they were probably out as they spent a lot of the day out, because I cooked in the kitchen a lot, and XM and X were told by accommodation not to be in the same room as me. M then proceeded to not so much interview, but interrogate every member of the flat for every detail about the past few months. She then asked everyone to write that all down and send her a signed copy. The next people to discover why my mother was feared was the accommodation people. She basically sat down with them and was very polite in the same way a lawyer is polite with the opposition. They went from polite and warm to the same grenade in anus expression that Skip had. When she was done chewing them out, she handed them a small card and said any further communication with my son is also to be copied to me and my lawyer. Both MLs are here. It wasn't angry or loud. It was polite, cold and quiet. They almost ran out the door after taking the card. 3 days later I sit my exams and fail, and several weeks pass and a hearing is arranged. This is basically a meeting between me and the university's conducts and Apple's people. My mother is invited to attend, followed by a meeting with X and XM, who have also just sat through a hearing. The hearing is in between exams and resits, so about 1.5 months after I sit my exams. In the time in between I go home to M, and she has me see several professionals who ask lots of questions, write letters and stuff. M also gets me to visit the local Buddhist sect, helps me chill out and recover from almost 6 months of mental abuse. XM turns up and is glaring daggers at my mother, who greets her by first and last name, having never met the woman, asks about M's other kid, her job, her oldest kid's job, and her husband, by name, and his job. XM looks shocked, but ignores my mother. I'm sat there trying to work out WTF is going on, and when M became some sort of information mogul. X is wearing some kind of stupid bell dress and actual fucking cat ears. I'm wearing a suit. In the hearing, the evidence XM provided is shown to us, and M basically rips them apart, pointing out that the accommodation failed in its duty to protect my mental health and prevent abuse. Atop this, she also points out that they took X's side without question, but were constantly questioning mine, along with several letters from psychologists basically saying X is a crazy bitch and should be kept away from me. And that XM only made it worse and should never be permitted to communicate with me. The hearing just nods and tries to keep a straight face. According to M, they knew they were fucked. We meet with XM and X. I say that all I want is an apology and my roasting dish is fixed. XM tells me they'd rather go to court than apologize to me for assaulting her daughter. X is looking very downcast and the uni people are looking terrified. It's at this point M stands up and thanks the uni people for all they have done, and that so long as this doesn't escalate she hopes to see them at my graduation. She then looks at XM and thanks her and says that she hopes that she has an interesting summer. I asked M what that was all about, and this is when I finally got told the hand she's been holding. XM works as a school cafeteria lady, and if she is externally investigated on her via DBS for anything kid related, she's likely to get fired. X's dad works at a bank that's going to have layoffs soon, and M's company is doing a very big contract for the company, and X's elder sister is an invigilator and you need to have a spotless DBS. Criminal background check for that. Last I heard their entire life had gone to shit, and the only one still working was the elder sister. Was asked not to return to uni accommodation and told that if she was going to be in the same module as me, she'd have to transfer module or sit it in a different year. This was all about